So folk theory is our sort of like unscientific understanding of the way the world works and things in the world. So the one example I like to use is gravity. We all have a folk theory about gravity. And I feel my folk theory is pretty darn good. Like it's got me through life. So it's not a insult to say folk theory. It's just that I don't scientifically study gravity. And that became clear when my daughter, when she was about 6, asked me how gravity worked. And I was very excited to tell her. And she's like, okay, so how does it work? And I'm like, well, when really big things are, they have this mass and that creates a force that attracts smaller things towards them. And she's like, oh, okay, great. Why? And right then I knew I was in trouble. So like 3 Ys down, I'm like, I have no idea how gravity works. And it turns out I truly don't know. And most of us don't know anything about the gravitational coefficient or how it works with time and space. And even physicists, will talk about the complexities of gravity. Right? So I have a folk theory of gravity. It allows me to get through my world. I have a folk theory of people. So my theory of mind is like a folk theory. So even though I'm not a neuroscientist, I have a good idea that if I were to come over and slap you, how you might react, right? I can guess how you would look shocked and questioning and maybe punch me back or something, all without knowing really how exactly the brain works. So we also have folk theories about technical systems too. Everything from toilets to helicopters to technology. So the helicopters and toilets have been worked out. We all have folk theories about them. Most people don't really know how those systems work. Well, something like the Facebook news feed is a massively complex system. It has over 1 billion social inputs a day. It has some of the world's most advanced machine learning taking place. So it's constantly changing and adapting, and it has people really tightly integrated with tech. And so people have folk theories of those. And the reason I started thinking about folk theories was because of the emotional contagion study. Part of me was like, when I looked through my hate mail, all the many, many emails I received, one of the main themes that came out was like, how dare you manipulate my newsfeed? And as I was listening to it to try and get a better understanding of what happened, that was a clear thing. Was people really had no idea that there was any manipulation going on at all. And it was clear that like, if your folk theory was that Facebook was like a platform, which was how they branded themselves for a long time, or a social window into your life, well, windows and platforms don't manipulate people and conduct experiments, right? And the notion of an algorithm, right? There's no idea of that in 2014. So we started to look into this folk theory thing, and folk theories are really fascinating and really difficult to study because they're unstated. So cognitive scientists have done some really nice work with kids, developmental psychologists, anthropologists. And so we used metaphors to try and get to them, and we would ask people like what their metaphor for, say, the news feed was. And we used a new tool called Wiki Survey, which is super cool because you get to ask a question and people choose like, is the news feed like a butler or like a spy? And they can pick one of those. Or they can say, well, neither of those really work for me, and then they can create their own. And it gets entered into the survey, and it has to fight it out with all the others. So it was really cool. We seeded this Wiki Survey with about 10 of our metaphors. In the end, the 10 winning metaphors, only 2 of ours were in it, and the 8 others were from users. That's just why that tool is so cool. And so we find in general, this is 2015-16, that there were 4 folk theories. They're sort of like a good one where like a butler goes out, it gets stuff for me. It's very useful. It's working for me. A very negative one, it's like a spy or paparazzi. It's taking things from me and the value is for somebody else. There was sort of like a black box, like I have no idea. Some things go in, some things come out, and it kind of like scares me. And then there was another one, it was like almost like a newspaper or a magazine where somebody is choosing stuff for me and I get to read content. And relatively neutral, kind of like folk theory. So in 2015-16, those were the 4. We saw them in both Twitter and Facebook, but Facebook had a little bit higher of the more negative ones than Twitter. Twitter had a little bit more of the positive and the neutral. And we're rerunning that now to see, like, after the Cambridge Analytica and the sort of privacy breaches, the late reporting, to see how that's affected folk theories. But that's what we've been doing, and it's been really cool because I talked to business leaders in all kinds of areas, and they're all sort of realizing that these folk theories are really important because you're essentially trust is essentially like you're making a promise, and it might be with a consumer, and you have an idea what your promise is, but if you don't know what their folk theory is of your product or your service, then you don't know what you've promised. And so you can make violations, you can violate that trust without even knowing it. Because you had an idea of a promise in mind, but they had a very different idea. And you don't know because you didn't analyze their folk theories. So that's been really interesting. For everything from cars to Alexa and Siri to the news feed, all this kind of stuff. So that was really eye-opening, that you can make these kinds of mistakes, really, like violate expectations without having a good idea.